Obviously, crime in American cities, especially large American cities, the vast majority of which are ruled and governed by Democratic mayors, has been a source of contention for a long time. There are lots of people in both political parties across the political spectrum who have had the experience of going to one of America's largest and most important cities and feeling unsafe there. Now, crime statistics don't always tell the record. Sometimes there can be all different reasons why crime statistics make it look like crime is going down, and yet the perception of the people who live there can be the opposite. It reminds me a lot of when the Biden administration kept telling people, look, I know you think the economy is bad. You feel like your family is struggling economically, but you need to snap out of it because GDP is growing and the statistics show that you have it better than ever. And people don't care about those statistics. They care about their perceptions. And there definitely is a perception, and it's a perception shared not just by many residents of the city, especially in the poorer parts of the city, but also just people who visit the city, who work in the city, that Washington is an unsafe place. Whether it's more unsafe than at any time before, whether it's gotten marginally safer, there definitely is a perception that it is unsafe. There's too much crime, there's too much violence. This has been if you look at President Trump's career over the last, say, 50 years of his time in the public eye, there aren't all that many consistent themes. One consistent theme for sure is that America is getting ripped off through foreign deals, foreign trade deals. We don't negotiate well. Our leaders are stupid. We get ripped off by Japan and China. He's been saying all of that for decades. None of that is new. But the other thing that's not new is his belief that crime is too rampant in American cities, that it's not sufficiently punished. And as a result, he has been talking now for quite some time about the potential need to federalize the police forces of various large American cities, again, most of whom are run by Democratic mayors, either by sending in the National Guard or trying to find a way to federalize their police department completely. Of course, earlier this year, he sent in the National Guard, the California National Guard, which he federalized and then sent into the city of Los Angeles after there were some major upheavals involving protests or people trying to impede ICE agents from detaining people they accused of being in the country illegally. And the mayor of Los Angeles, Karen Bass, and others in the city were outraged and indignant. And right now that's making its way through the courts about who controls the policing responsibilities in a city, and particularly who controls the National Guard. Is it the governor of the state of California, Gavin Newsom, as has been typically understood, or does President Obama have the right to overrule him and send in the National Guard? Earlier today, President Trump announced a new policy, not concerning any American state, but instead the federal district of Washington, D.C., where he announced that he is going to federalize the police department of Washington, D.C., as well as send in the National Guard in order to patrol the streets. He also said that he's going to have FBI agents patrolling the streets at night as well. This was prompted by a couple of incidents. Number one, just the general perception that Washington is unsafe by a lot of people who work there. Number two, Trump's belief and the belief of many in his White House that Washington has gotten too out of control. It's the nation's capital. It's a symbol of the United States. And yet the level of violence in Washington is way higher than it ought to be, they believe. And then number three, within the last several days, a prominent member of the Doge team, remember Doge, the person who goes by the name of Big Balls, was injured by a group of people. That's a little unclear, all the details, but essentially he was with his girlfriend, and they were targeted for carjacking. He threw her in the car, and at some point he ended up getting beaten pretty badly. There was a picture of him circulating where he was on the ground bleeding quite badly. And obviously when it comes to Trump, having somebody who he knows or who works for him be that subject of that crime, he does take those sorts of things personally. And so he announced today this decision, which is on the one hand a quite momentous decision that has never previously been done before, where the federal government goes in and federalizes the DC Police Department, sends in the National Guard. On the other, it's a lot of people are trying to raise questions about its constitutionality or its legality, and there's really not any question that President Trump does have the power under both clear law and the Constitution to do what he's doing today. There's really no basis for a legal objection, which we'll get to in a second. So here's a clip of President Trump at the White House today. He went to the White House press briefing room where he announced his policy, and here's part of what he had to say.
I'm announcing a historic action to rescue our nation's capital from crime, bloodshed, bedlam, and squalor, and worse. This is Liberation Day in D.C., and we're going to take our capital back. We're taking it back under the authorities vested in me as the President of the United States. I'm officially invoking Section 740 of the District of Columbia Home Rule Act. You know what that is? And placing the D.C. Metropolitan Police Department under direct federal control, and you'll be meeting the people that will be directly involved with that. Very good people, but they're tough, and they know what's happening, and they've done it before. In addition, I'm deploying the National Guard to help reestablish law, order, and public safety in Washington, D.C., and they're going to be allowed to do their job properly. And you people are victims of it, too. You know, you're reporters, and I understand a lot of you tend to be on the liberal side, but you don't want to get mugged and raped and shot and killed. And you all know people and friends of yours that happened. And so you can be anything you want, but you want to have safety in the streets. You want to be able to leave your apartment or your house where you live and feel safe and go into a store to buy a newspaper or buy something. And you don't have that now. The murder rate in Washington today is higher than that of Bogota, Colombia, Mexico City, some of the places that you hear about as being the worst places on earth. Much higher. This is much higher. The number of car thefts has doubled over the past 5 years, and the number of carjackings has more than tripled. Murders in 2023 reached the highest rate probably ever. They say 25 years, but they don't know what that means because it just goes back 25 years. Can't be worse. Our capital city has been overtaken by violent gangs and bloodthirsty criminals, roving mobs of wild youth, drugged-out maniacs and homeless people. And we're not going to let it happen anymore. We're not going to take it.
Now, one of the things President Trump often does is paints a very dystopian picture of the United States. He often depicts it in the most apocalyptic terms possible. Like if you walk around the street, it's basically a bunch of barbarians running around. There's really a complete societal breakdown. I don't think that's really consistent with people's experience in Washington, but it is true that there have been a lot of very serious, violent, random crimes, carjackings and assaults and murders. And I think there is a good valid argument that when it comes to Washington, D.C., which is supposed to be the place where our federal government works, members of Congress are sent, their staff is sent, interns come, people from around the world come, and there are many, many people who live in Washington, D.C. as well, where those murders often don't get as much attention, even though they happen quite a bit. I do think it's arguably in the interest of the federal government to try and fix a problem that, even if not quite as severe as President Trump said, nonetheless a very real problem. And I do think that this has been one of the failures of left liberal politics, is there has always been this idea that if you acknowledge that crime is a problem, it means that somehow you are assenting to or giving support for or strengthening what really has become a prison state in the United States. There's all those statistics where 25%, maybe it's a little less now, 23, 22, 23% of the world's population in prison. So if you take all the world's population that are in prison, 23% of that population is in the United States, even though the United States only represents 5% of the population on the planet. You have countries like China and India, whose population is 4 or 5 times greater than the United States. And we have this massive incarceration issue. It's not like we are a soft on crime country. We've passed so many laws that require massive prison terms, even for nonviolent crimes. And I think there's a sense on the liberal left that if you acknowledge that crime is a problem, if you acknowledge that crime is excessive, that people feel an impunity to commit violence, that they get out of jail too quickly, they're repeat offenders, that somehow you're both endorsing this prison system as well as defending the police. And I think that's a huge mistake. And this is one of the things I think has been a big failure about left liberal politics, is this idea that you can advocate for policies, but it's not the liberal left bourgeois or the liberal left upper middle class or even middle class that pays the price. I think immigration is a very good example of that, where people are saying, no, we can't restrict immigration. Immigration is the lifeblood of the country. Anybody who objects to the flow of illegal immigrants into the country is a racist, a white supremacist, an evil person. And yet, if you look at the statistics of who is most affected, which communities are most affected, it's typically Black and Latino, poor and working class communities, which is what has caused so many of them to migrate to the Republican Party and to Donald Trump. I mean, this has long been recognized. If you actually, there's a New York Times columnist called Jamal Bowie, who is a kind of hero to let the left, the liberal left of the United States. He's a New York Times columnist. I don't know how they ever get themselves to reconcile the fact that the New York Times is this very conservative establishment paper, and yet somehow this radical left writer is able to write there. Of course, he's not. There's nothing radical left about him at all, but he knows how to sound the right tones about Trump being a fascist, and they all love him. He's a Black writer that they all feel good about loving. But back in 2013, this is very amazing. He was writing at this liberal journal called The American Prospect, and he wrote an article warning the Democrats not to become too pro-immigrant, not to become too committed to an open border, because he said that it's Black voters and Latino voters who feel the most grievance and resentment from that they're the ones, especially Black wage workers and working class workers, who are the first to lose their job, that wages are driven down. That was back in 2013. And I think that's still true. And so when you have a lot of liberals kind of maligning concerns about immigration because they don't live in the neighborhoods which are affected, and you have a lot of Black and Latino working class people, that's what part of what gives the perception that these people don't care about our lives, they don't care about our issues. And the same has been true for crime. This prohibition on the ability to recognize that violent crime is a serious problem, that it kills a lot of people. Mostly the violence and the criminality are in working class and poor Black and Latino neighborhoods. And that's why if you look at the polling data, even after Black Lives Matter, you would often find this huge gap between white progressives, white liberals on the one hand, who thought that there should be a defunding of the police, but Black and Latinos, by and large, and poor and working class communities, they were saying, we don't want to defund the police. We need the police. We live in the communities that are riven by violent crime. And I think this is very much the type of issue that liberals often fall into the trap in. And it's part of this liberal mindset that because they are part of this group of people who live in certain communities that aren't affected, they can advocate certain policies that make them feel sanctimonious, make them feel righteous, even though they don't pay the price for it. So here's a chart that has been making the rounds today, and it is, I think, the official chart of violent crime in Washington. It it comes from the Metropolitan Police Department. It includes homicides, assaults with a weapon, sexual abuse, and robberies. That's including violent crime. And you can see that contrary to President Trump's depiction, violent crime has actually decreased from that peak that he talked about in 2023, where it kind of skyrocketed. And it has now come down to 1,584 violent crimes in 2025 so far. That peak that he was talking about was over 3,000. But you can even see that going back 2011, 2013, 2015, it was much higher than that peak. So it has really come down somewhat precipitously. But who cares? If you're the victim of a carjacking, if you're the victim of a violent crime, the fact that there's 20% fewer of such violent crimes now as there was previously doesn't make you any more willing to tolerate it. And I also think that there's a lot of reporting on this today. We would show you this if we were in the studio because we're here, we're a little more constrained, but there's a lot of studies that suggest that these kind of statistics can be easily manipulated based on what crimes are included, based on how the reporting is done, that there really is not this decrease. But even if this decrease is true, then it means that I think that's a pretty serious problem, especially again for a city that's supposed to be the kind of symbol of American democracy. Now we invite tourists from all over the country to come, from around the world to come, and a lot of them are being victimized by violent crime. Now, on the issue of whether what Trump did today is constitutional or legal, it's not really an interesting question because the answer is quite clearly yes. The answer is yes, what he's doing is constitutional, and yes, what he's doing is legal. And the short explanation for why is that there has been this move on the part of in Democratic Party politics to create statehood for Washington, D.C., to make it a 51st state. And the reason why is extremely obvious. It's nothing noble. It's the fact that 90% of Washington, D.C. voters are very loyal Democratic Party voters. So if you were to make Washington, D.C. a state, you would have two more Democratic senators automatically. You would have probably all new Democratic House members, a Democratic governor. You would just increase the power of the Democratic Party on a federal level, and the Republican Party is vehemently opposed, likely for the same reason. One might wonder if these were all Republican voters, how the debate would come out. My guess is the exact opposite. But anyway, that's the state of the debate. And the reality is that the founders thought it was very important that the seat of our federal government be independent, not be part of any state, so that it wasn't under the control of a Democratic legislature or a Republican legislature. It wasn't under the control of a Democratic or Republican governor. It was kind of this neutral zone. And in the Constitution, Article 1, Section 8, it's Clause 17, the Constitution assigns the governance of Washington to the United States Congress. It's not meant to be part of a state. It was never meant to be a state. And it's not like it was an oversight. There was very good reasons for it, which is we think if it's part of a state, our federal government could be unduly co-opted by the politics of that state. So we want to have it be this neutral zone. The United States is not the only country where that's true. There are other federally administered districts where the seat of the government is. And there are a lot of Democrats who have been moving to change that, even though it's in the Constitution, even though it was intrinsic to the design of the founders, which is their right. There's ways to change the Constitution. They're not anywhere near close to being able to do it. But you have to acknowledge, even if you agree with that design, which I do, there is an oddity, which is that all these people who live in the United States, in the District of Columbia, are not part of the government. They're not there to administer the government. They're there because they're American citizens who happen to live in Washington, D.C. And it is somewhat of a form of disenfranchisement not to have representation in Congress, not to be able to vote for any members of the Senate, not to have a governor. They have a city council and they have a mayor, but even that's fairly recent. And so during the 50s and 60s, there was this move to give DC more autonomy, that the people of the city deserve some better representation. And so they kind of reached a compromise. It was called the Home Rule Act of 1973, which basically said, okay, you can have a city council, you can have a mayor that you elect, the people of DC elect, and they're going to govern the city. But it also said that the federal government remains in charge. The Congress can override anything the mayor or the city council does because the Congress has that power under the Constitution, which hasn't changed. And right in that law, it says the president has the authority at any moment to federalize the police department and take it over and run the policing of the district in the event that he declares an emergency, which he's now done on the basis of this overstated but nonetheless not entirely invalid view of crime in Washington. So even the mayor of Washington, the very Democratic Party mayor of Washington, Bowser, admits today that there's nothing she can do because it absolutely is the president's prerogative to do. I think the bigger concern is, and the plan is not really that radical. It's not like there's going to be tens of thousands of National Guard troops having the military occupy all of Washington, D.C. It's going to be a much lighter footprint than that, but it is going to be a serious footprint. I think the reason why people are discomforted by this and alarmed by this is because President Trump isn't just content to doing this to D.C. He clearly wants to federalize the police department and deploy and control the National Guard, basically the military, in many of America's largest cities. He's talked about doing it in Chicago, and I believe in a couple other major cities. Obviously, he is doing it in Los Angeles as well, and that has always been a major concern in the United States for centuries, for at least 2 centuries, which is that we don't want to have our military operating inside the United States, performing regular law enforcement functions. There has been acts like the Posse Comitatus Act that's specifically designed to say that the military can't be used for law enforcement purposes in the United States. Obviously, the presidents have deployed National Guard troops before and federalized the police department. George H.W. Bush did it during the Rodney King riots. Donald Trump in his first term did it to some extent, not nearly as much as supporters wanted in response to the protests and riots of the Black Lives Matter movement in 2020. But in general, we have never been a country that wants, and I don't think we still want, the military controlled by the White House deployed to American cities because of how obviously dangerous that is to have centralized control. That's why we have local police departments under the control of our mayors, National Guard under control of our governors. And if this presages some big, huge shift in policy, then I can think it will become dangerous. If it's just a temporary measure designed to kind of pacify whatever needs pacifying in Washington, obviously we're going to have to pay a lot of attention to the civil liberties of the people who live in that city. Trump saying things like, yeah, I mean, if you walk up to the police officers and scream in their face, they're instructed not to do anything. If you spit on them, they're not. Now they're going to do something. They're going to hit back. They're basically authorized to do whatever they want to do. That kind of language, I think, requires some oversight, some concern. But as far as the legality is concerned, as far as the constitutionality is concerned, Trump is 100% within his rights to do that, which isn't the same thing as saying he should. The question will become if this starts to infect his views toward other cities. And like I said, there's already a case in Los Angeles working its way through the federal court system. In fact, there was a federal court hearing today on the appellate level about whether Donald Trump should be able to deploy the National Guard to California as he done in Los Angeles. So we'll definitely keep an eye on that. But I think that it's good to understand the legal background because this is likely to not be the last case of this. Thanks for watching this clip from System Update, our live show that airs every Monday through Friday at 7 p.m. Eastern, exclusively on Rumble. You can catch the full nightly shows live or view the backlog of episodes for free on our Rumble page. You can also find full episodes the morning after they air across all major podcasting platforms, including Spotify and Apple. All the information you need is linked below. We hope to see you there.